Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to work on a breaking down of a whitetail rear ham. So several months ago I did just a quick reel type video of me breaking down a dry aged ham from a roadkill doe that we recovered, and I had a lot of people commenting saying, hey, we'd like to know more about what are those various cuts that you have there. So what we've got here is, this is a rear ham from my son's buck that he got a week ago. Actually, this ham has been aging for 8 days. You'll notice it still has a glossy sheen to it. That's because I aged this ham in a game bag. If I age it laying out in the refrigerator just on like a cookie sheet or whatever, it'll develop this rind all over the top of it. That's really good too. I mean, it's still aging. You know, there's not really that much of a difference in the aging. One's dry aged versus this is almost a wet aged. But you don't want it to get wet as far as down inside a cooler or anything like that. So when I age these in a cooler or in a refrigerator, so in a cooler, let me talk about how a cooler, if I do it in a cooler, I'll have frozen bottles of water that I have laid on top of the meat. That keeps me from dumping bags of ice on it and that ice melting and getting the meat all wet. When you do that, a lot of times your meat will discolor. It will turn this yucky gray looking, and it will actually develop an odor about it a lot of times, even if you leave the drain plugged open for it to go out. If you do it in a refrigerator, if you leave a game bag on it, it'll still have this nice, soft, kind of shiny, kind of looks like right after you skin the deer is kind of what it looks like. If you leave it just laying out in the open, that rind develops. The only problem with doing that is then you've got to go through and you have to kind of trim that rind away a lot of times depending on what you're going to do with the meat. So I prefer to age it in a game bag if I can. Alright, so I'm going to start to dig into this ham. I've got my daughter, Taryn, 10 years old here running the camera, so I'm going to be giving her a little bit of cues every so often as far as what to do. That's, you know, when you don't want to hire a cameraman, you use whatever you got available. So, hello. Yeah, she's a big help. Her and my son have been in here helping me. We've butchered the rest of his deer, and all that's left is this one ham now. So we're going to just dig into this. Taryn, go ahead and angle down and zoom in on this ham now. So when you're looking at one of these hams, first thing you'll see is there's these natural lines running through it. When you're going to break down one of these hams in your home, all you got to do is follow those natural lines. So I've got several different knives here that I've got from my butchering kit, and I use different ones depending on the scenario. I actually like this. I don't even know what kind of knife this is, but it's got a rounded end on it. I like this. Okay, can you see it now? Yeah. I like this knife because this rounded end allows me to kind of really work these seams pretty easily and not damage anything. You'll notice there's a lot of just kind of connective tissue in here. So when you start pulling up on these various locations, you'll just kind of see this clear membrane that's connecting the different portions and cuts of the different roasts. Technically, it's all roasts in here, and then you can take those roasts and you can choose to break those roasts down into steaks, or you can keep those roasts whole to, you know, do different things with it. You can either cook it as a roast, or you can freeze it as a roast, and then when you get it out and thaw it, then you can cut the steaks out of it that way. It all depends. There's a lot of flexibility you have with this. So all I'm doing right now is just going through pulling off this thin layer of basically just silver skin here. This is just going to be pitched. What I've got beside me, you probably can't see it right now, is I've got my grind bucket over here. This is not going to go into the grind bucket for the most part. This part right here is just, oh, come on. This is just a really thin layer of silver skin on both sides. That's going to get pitched in my pitch bucket, but I've got another one there. I'll throw it in there for now. You can see here where you can see the different kind of seams. All you have to do is follow the road map. I mean, that's what they say a lot of times is there's a natural road map here on these hind quarters that if you want to follow them, it gives you the natural roast cuts already. So you see, all I'm doing is lightly cutting through this top layer of kind of silver skin flap right here. That's just another flap of silver skin, and I'm beginning to expose the roasts down below. And once I get this cut through, then we'll come back and I'll show you how this separates and pulls apart. All right, so I've cut through this first seam, and as you see now, it just starts to kind of unroll here. So what you have is in the center of all this ham is you've got the main leg bone going down through here, and all these roasts are just kind of surrounding this. So as you work your way through, you know, you just keep following these seams, just slowly cutting, and the different roasts continue to separate off through here. Now this roast I'm holding in my hand, now there are a couple places here where it gets a little tricky, where there's a couple of different roasts come together, and you know, you're gonna occasionally cut through into something that you're not gonna always follow the seam. You may miss your cut, you may have a seam that's hidden, and that happens. I mean, it happens to everybody. We've done a whole bunch of deer, and even I do it. You know, I think I may have just done it just then. I'll find out as I start to unroll this, but what you have here, this is technically, I think they call this one the bottom round. This has very long grains in it. It also has, both sides of it have a thick layer of silver skin. This is a roast that a lot of people like to use for like a jerky, because you can cut these long strips out following with the grain. You know, jerky, you want to cut it with the grain. So this is a good roast for that. You can use this to cook down as a roast, like if you make a Mississippi pot roast or a deer roast or whatever. But I would recommend cutting it into chunks first, because this one takes a really long time to break down if you're slow cooking it. All right, so now this is the bottom round roast. It's totally, you know, disconnected from the rest of the ham here. As I said before, you've got this, you can't really see it all right here, but there's a very thick layer of silver skin on this side. You spin it around, there's a very thick layer of silver skin on this side. A lot of times I'll go through here and I'll cut a lot of this silver skin trash right here off, and it'll go into my scrap bucket, which is actually over there. I'm gonna pull that scrap out of there. I'll put it over there later. But so there's a bunch of this on here. Just go through and I'll take my time. I usually use the other knife, but I just got this one in my hand. Cut it out of there, and then, you know, do whatever you want. You can either keep it whole, you can chunk it up if you want to, you can grind it. If you want to, what we did with the other ham, because my son specifically requested a lot of ground, we ended up just throwing one whole bottom round roast into the grind bucket, which is over here, and we're going to grind it up. We're not going to do both of them. This one we're going to do something different with. I'm going to ask him and we'll see. We may keep it whole, I don't know, but for now, that's the bottom round roast, and it's going to go over here in this bucket. But one thing I need to point out, this is the size of a ham you're going to get off of this deer dressed out at roughly 125 pounds. It was an 8-point that he shot. We're unsure yet if it was a 2.5-year-old or 3.5-year-old. We're going to find that out a little bit later. But this is some good size roasts and a really large ham coming out of a East Tennessee whitetail deer. So that bottom round is kind of situated right here off to the side of, this is kind of the sirloin roast. Some people call it the football roast because it's a very large round roast. I mean, you'll find as you start cutting these membranes away and start following these seams, when you get to this here in a little bit, you'll find that it's a really large round or oval shaped roast. I'm not going to mess with it exactly right now. I'm going to show you this roast down here at the bottom. So directly below that bottom round roast is this really small, you got to be careful because it's hard to see those the connective tissue there, but there's this really small roast right here, and you go through here and you kind of separate it out. I've almost got it. It's not very large, but I'll show you here in just a second. And sometimes you got to flip these over and do different. It's stuck to the cutting board. Well, it's stuck for now. It's stuck. I'll just cut it off right here because I'm almost to where it goes anyway. There it goes. I'm already in there now. So one thing to point out is don't be intimidated by this whole process. We jumped into butchering our own deer after we took some deer. There were a couple things happened. It was a multi-step scenario that led us to this, but we started doing our own after I took a deer that was around 100 pounds to a commercial processor, and we went back to pick it up, and it was a double lung rib pass-through shot. We went to pick that deer back up, and they gave me a measly box of 20 pounds of deer meat. It was, and that included the ground and everything. And I was pretty frustrated by that. And then we decided to change processors, and I made the, I guess you can call it, fortunate mistake of sending my wife to take that deer to the processor. And when she drove up and unloaded that deer at the processor, she saw this mound of deer just piled up in the floor. They're going through with loppers, you know, like tree loppers or hacksaws, cutting legs off, and all these deer were just piled up in a room. And then they had in the other room just boxes of deer meat that people were coming and picking up. And she's like, I don't want to eat deer if that's the way it's done. So we started butchering our own. And I will say that we immediately saw a increase in yield of 30 to 40% per deer than what we were getting before. And the quality of meat was far superior to that of what we were getting in the processors. And the reason is because I started aging my deer. A lot of these processors will hang the deer with the hide on for 2 days, maybe 3 days. They're trying to get that out of there to get a turnover to keep getting as many deer pushed through. I age my deer for anywhere from 5 to 8 days. This is actually day 9 for this deer. So this is going for a couple days longer than I normally do, but it makes a huge difference on the flavor and texture of this meat. What I'm getting to though is don't be intimidated. There are resources out there to help you. There are people out there that are willing to help you. I had a friend that we knew from a long time ago. He has his own YouTube channel that I asked all kinds of questions of. And you know, he's the one that helped coach me through this just over the internet to help me with this. So, you know, if you're watching this and you have questions, shoot me a message, comment, let me know. I'll do what I can to help you out. But what I want to point out though is this is the small roast that's situated down below the bottom round. I always call it the eye of round. I don't know if that's the actual name. It's got very long grain in it, but it is an extremely tender little roast. It's almost like a secret tenderloin. And what I'll do is I'll keep this whole and I'll vacuum pack it all on its own, and we'll just use it like a tenderloin. All right, so as you're working through this, you're going to see all this. There's a lot of fat mixed in here depending on where your deer is from and what its diet is. Here, it's mostly acorns and just green browse. There are not large agricultural fields here. We've got really small micro food plots here, which they're not really hitting at all this year. But what you're going to find is different amounts of fat, but you've also got some what do they call them? Glands and different things in here. Usually the glands and things are going to be kind of mixed in these wads of white, fatty looking tissue. So just go through, cut these all out, and it's just going to pull apart. A lot of times on really young deer, so fawns and yearlings, it'll just pull right out by hand. You don't even have to have a knife. And even these roasts, I'll just rip them apart by hand. I won't even use a knife to go through here, but I mean, even like right here, you see just running my finger down it, it separates and pulls loose. Okay, let's move on up here to this next roast. This is the football roast. And so you just keep following this membrane around through here, and you get this top flat kind of roast that comes, I call it a roast. I think it's technically the rump roast, but you'll see here in just a second. So this is just going to unfold here. I'm going to flip it over because now I really kind of need to move to the other side anyway. This is your ball joint that you're going to have. There's a little bit of hair here, but that's going to come away as I pull this flap off. Terry, can you still see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start pulling this off. Start seeing it's just all connected by connective tissue in here. It's going to come right off here. Knife could use a little touch up of sharpening, that's for sure. So what I'm going to do,
around the bone there too.
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a little bit. So here's another wad of fat right here inside this rump roast, and there's another gland I believe inside there, and I think bucks actually have more glands in them than the does do, but I just go through and take my time and cut all these out. You know, for the most people complain about deer meat being gamey. They say, oh, it's too gamey for me to eat. I need to soak it in buttermilk and do all this, soak it in Italian dressing and all that stuff. If you take the time and you cut the silver skin away, you cut the fat off, and you do all this sort of stuff in the processing phase, you'll be shocked at how you do not need to do all of those other things because the meat no longer has that gamey flavor to it. All right, so we flipped it over here to the other side. We've got all that rump roast and all that stuff pulled off. I'm just going to grind that today. It's not very good. The dog's running through over here, and the wife's hollering at the dog to keep her from coming over here trying to get all the scraps. Anyway, so what I'm going to do here now, I'm following this grain or this this seam down here on this football roast. So as you just keep cutting it away here, this football roast, eventually you'll get it exposed on all 3 sides. But in order to fully get it to break free, you actually have to just gouge your knife all the way into the bone and then just kind of start filleting it off that bone, like, you know, you think about how you fillet a fish off of a, you know, you get a fillet off of a fish or whatever. It's the same sort of thing. You just kind of start working that knife around that bone, and you start just laying it off there. So you see, I'm just kind of following this bone around. It's really hard to get everything off as you're doing this because it's kind of an awkward position to be in. But you just keep working it around, and you kind of have to flip these things back and forth and move them around and different things. Here I'm just kind of separating it around this knee joint here. And here you can see where it's kind of slowly starting to pull off there. So just cut it off here, work your way down to the bone, and start filleting it off that bone there. And you'll see in just a second why they call it a football roast. But it's technically, I think it's the sirloin roast. Boy, that's heavy. And slippery. It's wanting to fall out of my hands. So I'm coming up on the knee joint there. Or the hip joint. Yep, now the bone is sitting there. So this is your football roast, your sirloin roast. And obviously, you know, it looks like a football. Can you see that okay?
Hold on.
Snoopy. Now the dogs are all wanting meat.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's your football roast, your sirloin roast. It actually has layers inside of it. So I'll post a little clip here of where we cut steaks out of this one, out of the other sirloin roast on the other hand. This can be kept whole if you're wanting to make a whole deer roast, or they make really good steaks. Now, like I said, think of it as like you've got a center, kind of a cylindrical roast right down the middle, and then you've got layers of roast wrapped around that center roast, tightly connected to it. That's kind of how this looks if you were to break it down. A lot of times what I'll do if I'm going to prepare this for steaks is I'll cut the end pieces off, throw them in my grind bucket, and then I'll cut steaks about 1 inch thick out across it here, and I'll vacuum pack those steaks just for us to have as sirloin steaks. All right, so the last real roast, if you want to call it, on here now is this really large hunk right here. This is actually your top round roast. And so same sort of thing, you just have to keep working your knife along the underside of the large bone here, and it begins to start falling off. It's connected right there. A lot of this stuff here that's kind of just dangling and hanging in different places, I'm going to take it and throw it in my grind bucket. Take this, flip it back over again, and then you just kind of work this seam through here. Can you see that, Taryn?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that? All right. So this is actually a couple things right here. There's actually a seam right here.
She's begging.
Yeah, Snoopy, go away.
There.
You would think she never gets any treats.
Yep, you'd think.
So,
it's her favorite day, though.
Yeah, deer processing day is one of her favorite days. So you see here, this is just peeling right away. And this is, okay, get over here to it, you can see a little bit better. There is a chunk of meat right here in the middle of this, and I think it's what they refer to as the tri-tip. It's on a deer, there's not a lot of meat there, and it's got a lot of silver skin connected to it and around it. So normally that's one of those that I just kind of throw into the grind pile, personally. Working my way around here, just still kind of cut that off. There's still just all this connective tissue running around through here. And then eventually it'll pull right away right there. So if you look at it, it's kind of got 3 tips to it. You know, on a beef, they're considered to be pretty large. And a lot of people buy tri-tip and do different things with it. On a deer, at least I think this is the tri-tip anyway. I could be mistaken, but the way I had it explained to me before, that's what it was. It's not very large, but it goes in the grind pit. This right here is the roast that is one of the premier roasts to us anyway. So just go through here and cut this off. It's the last roast I have left here until I get down to the shank, and I'll go over that in a minute. So this right here is your top round roast. Now, there's also a little bitty roast connected to the side of it here. You find this little seam in here, just kind of start running your finger in it, and eventually it'll start to separate. It's slowly working its way off. It's not a very discernible or defined seam right here. So it's kind of difficult to see. It's maybe a little bit better to see it on this side. Yeah, it's coming off better on this side. I'll get here to it in just a minute. Darren, can you see this okay?
I might have to zoom in a little bit on it.
Well, it's okay. It's about to come loose, so.
Yeah, now I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it from far away.
All right, so here you go. This is another little thin roast, similar to like the eye of round roast right here. I usually vacuum pack them both together. And this has got a little gland on it right here that I'm gonna cut off before I pack it. And what you end up with is two really tender, small little roasts here that I'll use for different things. So I'm gonna cut this little gland off of here because you don't really want to eat those glands. They make a really good dog treat. Just feed the dogs the gland meat and stuff. But anyway, there's that.
Hey, I heard feed the dogs.
Yeah. So this right here now is your top sirloin. I'm just kind of cutting this silver skin off. This is your top sirloin. This is like premier deer steak. You can take this, it's stuck to the cutting block. Take this and cut it into 1-inch steaks like this, and they are ultra tender, super flavorful. Probably my favorite steaks on the deer. I mean, yeah, everybody says backstrap is their favorite. I mean, we eat a lot of backstrap, but we also use our backstrap a lot for stir fries and things like that. Things that, you know, a lot of your other cuts with deer would be too tough to do. So we use our backstrap a lot for that. We don't, sometimes we will grill a backstrap whole to about a medium and then slice it really thin and serve it or whatever. But, you know, for like just a general deer steak, this right here is probably our favorite. And this is the top round roast. All right, so the only thing left now are these hunks of meat down here attached to the lower leg. This is what they call the shank. And you kind of go in here, it just separates from the bone and the meat right there really easily. Come in here, cut it right off. You don't really have to be very sensitive or delicate with it. I mean, just, you know, hack at it and pull it off. There are a couple things here. Well, it's stuck. I'm hitting something there. Hopefully it's not my finger. So this is one part of the shank. There's 2 or 3 lobes. Think of your calf. I mean, this is basically like a calf muscle. You think of your calf, you know, when you flex that calf muscle, you've got 2 or 3 different lobes on that calf muscle. Same sort of thing with a deer. There's multiple lobes to that shank, to that calf muscle. A lot of people out there just take this thing and they grind it. And that's all they do. Actually, let me take that back. A lot of people I know, they don't even eat this. This is one other thing we learned whenever we were going to a commercial processor and I asked them to do something special with the shanks. They were like, we don't even use those. Nobody eats those things. And I'm like, buddy, you don't know what you're missing out on. There's a lot of wonderful flavor in the shank. This thing keeps sticking to this cutting board. It's super sticky. We will take these and we will slow cook them in a Dutch oven or a crock pot for 5 or 6 hours. And they will literally just shred all the pieces on you. All these tendons and different things in here, when you slow cook these and you braise them and then slow cook them, look up ossobuco if you want to know. Now that's with bone in. If you take a saw, if you freeze this and you saw it off and you leave the bone in the middle and you have like 1-inch discs with meat with bone in the middle. But look up ossobuco or braising and it'll tell you how to do that. You talk about an amazing cut of meat. This may be one of our favorite flavor pieces of meat to use on the deer because all this tendon and connective tissue just breaks down into this buttery, smooth silkiness that has an amazing flavor about it. Anyway, this is one of those. There's another one over here. I'll cut them off here in just a second. One other thing before we close out this video here is a lot of people will take these bones and just pitch them when they get to this point. After they get all the meat off, they'll throw them, and that's fine. That's kind of the normal thing to do. I mean, I guess follow your local regulations, number one. Make sure you're not in an area with CWD. We don't have it here on the eastern part of Tennessee, so it's not anything I have to think about or worry about at this time. But what I will do with my bones, my leg bones, primarily the rear leg bones, because they are so thick and they're more rounded, I guess if you want to say it. I will take my bone saw and I will cut the leg bones in half. Now this bone here is so long, I may actually cut it into 3 pieces. I don't know yet. What I'll do is I'll cut these bones, expose the marrow. I will lay them out on a cookie sheet, baking sheet. I'll season them with salt, pepper. You know, I like to use reload rub, different things, but any kind of seasoning you've got that you like. Hit them up, season them, stick them in your oven under the broil function. Roast these legs at a real high temperature for 20-25 minutes. Get a nice good char on them where they're sizzling. All that marrow loosens up and starts to run out the ends of the bones. Take those bone pieces and the meat on them, throw them in a crock pot or a large Dutch oven with some root vegetables. Hit it with whatever seasoning you want to do, and you slow cook this stuff, this whole concoction, depending on what you're wanting to make. If you're wanting to make deer stock, you're going to want to slow cook it for about 6 to 8 hours. I like to make bone broth with mine, and we will actually use the bone broth as well as a stock. Well, so when I make my bone broth, I will slow cook this like in a crock pot for 24 hours on low heat. And when it's done and I pull these bones out of that crock pot, they are porous. You can almost snap the bones over your legs. You're cooking these at such a temperature and such a long period of time that it's pulling all the vitamins and minerals out of these bones. And then when you drink that bone broth or you use that bone broth, you are now taking all those vitamins and minerals in. You're going to flavor it with your carrots, and I put turnips and potatoes and things like that in it just when I'm roasting it or when I'm cooking it in the crock pot for a long time. So just something else to think about. I may do a video on that here as we get closer to time. That's pretty much going to be it for this video. Come here, baby. I'm all bloody.
It's not it. Then you cook it and you enjoy it.
And then you cook it and you enjoy it. That's right.
Exactly.
So this is my little helper. My son who shot the deer, he's disappeared. I'm not sure where he went. But anyway, we're going to get this cleaned up, get done. We've been going at this now for a few hours because I was trying to talk him through all this. We've been taking photos, doing video clips, doing different things to kind of pull this together. If I was just going through and trying, and this is a large deer, so the bigger the deer you have, the more work, more cuts you're going to have, different things you got to do. Plus, we still got all this grinding to do. But it's totally worth it, especially in the day where processors are charging $100 and up to process a whitetail deer. We bring it in, we do it ourselves, we get a higher yield, it's better quality. We know it's our deer, we know exactly what we have in it and where it came from and everything else. So, to me, that's just our choice. There's no other way we would do it. But I thank you for watching. If you have any questions, I ask that you leave a comment below, ask those questions. If you haven't yet, hit that like and subscribe button. If you have ideas for future videos, drop them in the comments below as well. Hope you have yourself a wonderful day. Stay safe and God bless.